answer. You don't want the why.
It's funny.
It's our choice, isn't it?
Oh, it's not your choice.
You don't want to.
You were forced
You
for
don't
that.
want to.
You were forced for that. So,
Why?
let me just
You always
summarize.
do that, Hatun. You
Islamic
always do that.
Jamaat
You want
demonize
you don't want to
people.
shake
Hatun does.
If you love me, you have to believe in me. Should I love you? Let me give you a hug. Let me give you a hug. Should I love you? Let me give you a hug. I love you. I love you. I love you. You know I love you. You don't love me?
It's not allowed. It's not allowed.
You don't love me? So, you don't love me? You don't love me? You don't love me, but I love you. And you are still lying.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
All right, shake my hand.
It's fornication.
Shake my hand.
I can shake your hand. You're a man.
Are you going to fornicate with me?
Do you want people to
The hadith doesn't say that. The hadith doesn't say that.
Hadith is madness.
No, it doesn't say
You're
that.
not even using your brain anymore.
You hugged her earlier.
Your
didn't you?
brain anymore.
Did you hug her
You're
earlier?
not even using it.
Did you hug her?
Bad.
So, did you hug her? Did you hug her earlier?
Madness.
Did you hug her earlier?
Yes, Christ loved us so much.
Would your missus like for you to hug other women?
We are Christian men and
Answer
women.
my question,
We
my
can
friend.
sit in one place
I'm
and
asking
then we
you.
can give hugs to one another, sir.
Isn't it?
Why do you think about sex all the
Stop.
time?
The first step.
yes.
The first step
Use
to
your
zina.
brain.
The first step to zina. Yeah. The
Yes,
first step
yes.
to zina.
Come on now.
The first step to zina is touching.
Touching, yes.
Yeah. There could
I'm
be
not
touching
saying
anywhere. I
touch
can
my
touch a
boobs,
woman's
sir.
hand.
I'm saying shake my hand.
No, why?
But I will not touch a
That
woman's
is just
hand.
like out
I
of
will not shake a
order.
woman's hands. I'm not allowed to touch a
Do
woman's
you
hand.
have a wife?
Because I respect you as a human being.
Sir,
No, in our religion we don't shake hands with women. So, because we don't want to. Because our prophet said. Because our prophet said. That's enough. That's enough for us. That's enough.
What was the reason?
That's enough. If he said it, he said it. That's enough. Don't care. That's it. Yes.
So when you know a woman sticks out her hand, some people are comfortable with shaking her hand and they'll quote a fatwa or something and whatever. I'm personally not comfortable shaking hands with women. I'm not giving you a fatwa. I'm just saying I'm personally not comfortable. And I'll just say, you know, we have this thing in our family where we only touch women within our family, and we have too much respect for women outside. We don't have the privilege to be able to touch them. It's a thing. It's a Muslim thing. You know, so instead of turning it into something like, ew, you kafir, I can't touch you, I turn it into, listen, just out of respect for women, unless they're in our family, we don't have the right to touch them. I hope you can respect that. And they do. We just gotta find a smart way of saying things.
I would like to say, first of all, that this is probably the hardest mitzvah, well, it's not really a mitzvah, but the hardest concept of Judaism for most people to either grapple with or take on. For those of you that don't know, Shomer Negiah usually refers to the fact that Jews, Orthodox Jews, don't touch anyone of the opposite sex except for either their husband or sometimes immediate family members. But that includes usually handshaking, hugging, any sort of affectionate touch. So this is obviously in many societies considered very weird, and is definitely something that, you know, gets a lot of shock when it's first heard about.
One of the things a lot of women in this culture, if a man doesn't shake the hand, they immediately assume I'm unclean, the woman. Whereas a Muslim woman can't shake a male's hand. It's, you know, it's the same way, but the interpretation is always seen from that perspective. And this is part of the problem in our behavior as Muslims and in our articulation of our teaching, right? Is that there are gross misconceptions, not only outside of the Islamic community, but inside the Islamic community as well. And that's where a lot of the source of the problem is, that there is jahiliyyah.
A little about the meaning of the word. Most young Jews or Baljuba shorten the term Shomer Negiah, and they will say just Shomer. So often, you know, you'll hear a Jew say, like, "Are you Shomer?" AKA, "Can I shake your hand?" Shomer literally means to guard. It comes from the Hebrew verb lishmor, which means to guard or to keep. So you can be Shomer anything. You can be Shomer family time, Shomer kashrut, Shomer Shabbat, Shomer going for a run in the morning. You know, anything that you guard and you hold close to your heart, you can be Shomer. So when someone asks you, "Are you Shomer?" once again, they're not really saying anything that makes any sense, but usually they're referring to the fact that, you know, are you someone that touches people or not? So Negiah means touch. So to be Shomer Negiah doesn't mean that you don't touch anyone. It means that you guard your touch. It means that your touch is precious to you. So the goal of this aspect of Judaism is to, obviously it's to block any unwanted contact between men and women, but it's also to help us elevate the idea of touch. You know, many people will say, like, "Oh, it's just a hug, oh, it's just a handshake, what's the big deal?" And you know what? In the end, you could say, "Oh, it's just sex. Oh, it's just family. Oh, it's just this," you know, anything. If you want it to be meaningless, if you want something to be meaningless, you can make it meaningless. So yes, it's just a hug, or yes, it's just a handshake, if you choose to make it just a handshake. So the idea is that eventually Shomer Negiah, the idea of taking on this aspect of Judaism, will make it so that the people that you do touch, aka your husband, the person that you do touch, is going to be so much more intense because he's the only person that you touch. That's so amazing. This is the only person whose hand you hold. That makes hand holding at a whole different world, a whole different level. So really, it is a very, very amazing thing once you're doing it right. So I would like to add that this advice that I'm giving right now is, I would say, for women only. Men have a very different relationship with touch, and their bodies have different reactions with touch. So what I'm advising now is not necessarily for men to take on. So ladies, if you are thinking of taking on Shomer Negiah and it is making you feel dreadful and you're dreading it and you don't know what to do about this because you know this is a part of Judaism and you want to try it out, I would suggest a step that I took and really, really helped me in the beginning. Take some time to realize that everything you do, every action, every word, everything you do in this world is a means of communication. Even every thought, you are communicating something to yourself. So we all know how our thoughts can change our reality. So I would like you to start viewing touch as a means of communication, and deep communication. Realize that every time you shake someone's hand, you're not just shaking their hand, you're communicating something. You're communicating warmth and connection and a whole bunch of stuff, whatever you want to communicate. So before you take on the idea of not touching men or becoming Shomer Negiah, you have to first internalize the reality that touch is a means of communication. So I would suggest that every time you touch someone, every time you hug someone, even your girlfriends, even your cat, even your anything, you know, take the time to realize that I am communicating something with my touch. And do this for a couple of weeks. for me personally, after a couple of weeks of doing this, I started to realize, okay, so this is a means of communication. Who exactly do I want to be communicating this with? Who exactly do I want to be connecting to? And when you get to that point, then you can start deciding, maybe I don't want to be communicating this sort of connection with every man that I meet. And then you can start maybe grappling with the idea of taking on Shomer Negiah, which is guarding your touch with men. But first, I suggest doing almost the opposite, which is just making your touch meaningful, realizing that it's a means of communication. We live in a society where, if you want something not to matter, it cannot matter. So, but who wants to live like that? I certainly don't. I want my life to matter, and I want my actions to matter. So take the time to realize that touching people and hugging people, shaking hands, these are all means of communication, and really internalize that reality. And then, maybe then, you can think about taking on Shomer Negiah.
I was teaching in Europe last year, and a bunch of girls came into the auditorium, and kind of European techno-punk type stuff, and pretty wild. And I tell you, my heart went out for them, because you could tell immediately they didn't have a father. And it was a lot of them there. So I asked them this question. I said, girls, how many of you have seen BBC's version of Pride and Prejudice, or even Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley? And most of them raised their hand. And I said, after you saw the movie, or while you were viewing the movie, did it just make you feel sad, in a way? A melancholy, maybe, that you couldn't understand? Most of them said yes. And I said, let me suggest to you what was the reason for the melancholy. Is that you live in a culture that has killed beauty. It's killed dignity. It's killed innocence. It's killed manners and courtesy and chivalry and absolutely everything. And here you watch this movie where women dress a certain way. They're refined in a certain way. They don't participate in the brutish things of men. They're concealed. They're, again, innocent. It's like this. I say, young girls, can you imagine a movie where a girl is sitting there and all of a sudden a guy reaches for a book, and while he reaches for the book, she reaches for the book, and he happens just to touch her hand lightly while he's reaching for the book, and it literally takes her breath away. See, we can't experience that anymore, can we? Because we're so just immoral and gross that the touching of a hand can't cause your heart to beat faster. It can't take your breath away because of the culture in which you live, the death of beauty. It's your job to restore that.
Another study that also looked at evangelicals found that 80% of the youth identified themselves as individuals who are engaging in premarital sex.
And that's 80% of evangelicals when you consider everybody. And that's 80% of evangelicals admitting it.